Get him! Burn it all down! You're dead!
The storm came in from the east just after dusk, crawling over the cotton stubble and the line of black cypress that marked the edge of my land. The first thunder was low and rolling, like a wagon on distant gravel. Then came the rain, slow, heavy drops that struck the tin roof of the farmhouse with a rhythm that set my nerves on edge. By the time the wind picked up, I had already bolted the front door and drawn the wooden bar across it. The single lamp on the kitchen table burned unsteadily, casting long, trembling shadows against the cracked plaster walls. I remember how the flame bent each time the wind found a crack somewhere in the boards, as if the house itself were breathing, exhaling the damp, ghostly air of another sleepless night. Outside, somewhere beyond the porch, a figure was moving through the dark. The sound of boots or bare feet, I couldn't tell at first, came faint, then close, then stopped altogether. The dogs had long since gone silent. Even the mule in the shed had gone still, uneasy in its stall. When the knock came, it was soft. 2 times. Then again. Mrs. The voice was deep, muffled by the wood and the storm. "It's me." I froze. The lamp flickered once, the wick trembling in its glass chimney, and I caught my reflection in the window, pale face, loose hair fallen from its pins, eyes wide as if I had seen a ghost. But the ghost outside was flesh. Jonah. He said my name again, low, as though afraid to wake the sleeping fields. "Mrs. Elinor, you awake in there?" My throat went dry. My name in his mouth sent something sharp through me. Not quite fear and not quite longing, but a mixture of both that made my hand shake when I reached for the door latch. "Jonah," I whispered, barely trusting my own voice. "Go back to the quarters. Not tonight." The rain thudded heavier. The roof leaked in 3 places, and I could smell the iron in the water as it slid down the walls and pooled near the hearth. I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear him breathing, steady, patient, the way he always breathed when waiting for me to finish a thought before speaking. "They've been riding," he said. "Harlan's men. I seen their torches by the creek. Figured I'd best check you was safe." I shut my eyes. That name Harlan carried a taste of bile every time I heard it. He was my neighbor, a man of means and cruelty in equal measure, the kind of man who smiled when he lied. I'd seen him at Sunday service, head bowed like a pious man, though the stories that followed him could blacken a prayer. I wanted to thank Jonah, to tell him his watching eyes, his silent presence, made the long nights bearable. But gratitude between us was a dangerous thing. Every word we shared, every kindness exchanged, could be twisted into sin by those who looked for sin in everything. "Go," I whispered again, pressing my palm to the cold wood. "Please, Jonah, I beg you, don't enter." A long silence followed, broken only by the groaning wind and the faint rattle of loose shutters. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed lower, rougher, carrying a hurt I had no right to cause. "Yes, ma'am." The words fell heavy, not in defiance, but in resignation. I listened as his footsteps retreated across the porch, fading into the rain. Only when the sound was gone did I slide down against the door, my skirts damp, my pulse hammering beneath my collarbone. I could still feel his nearness, the warmth of him on the other side of that thin barrier. I thought of the stories whispered in town, the way they said he'd once crushed a man's windpipe with his bare hands down in Natchez, how the trader had sold him cheap because no one could break him. They called him the brute from the river lot. I knew him differently. I had seen the quiet in his eyes when he fixed the fence posts, the care in his hands when he lifted a lame calf, the patience in the way he waited for me to find the right words when I gave him orders. Brutish. Yes, but only because the world had made him so. I rose, crossed to the table, and turned down the lamp. Darkness fell heavy, thick as the humidity. In that hush, I could hear the memory of his knock repeating, echoing backward through time. Back to the first evening he had stood on this same porch, then just a stranger, newly bought after my husband's burial. That was 3 months past, though it felt like a lifetime had withered since. The storm outside grew angrier. Each flash of lightning illuminated the fields beyond, showing rows of withered stalks and pools of standing water where cotton should have grown. My farm was dying, and I was dying with it alone, widowed, surrounded by debt collectors and men who saw my vulnerability as invitation. When Thomas, my husband, had still drawn breath, he spoke little and worked less. He'd come home from town with whiskey on his breath and dust on his boots, speaking of expansion, new acres, new slaves. But fever carried him off before any of that came true. He left behind the land, the debts, and 3 enslaved souls he had purchased with borrowed money. Old Moses, who could no longer work the fields but knew how to mend tools, Lila, no more than 16, timid as a bird. And Jonah, the one the trader had called half wild. The first time I saw Jonah, he was standing barefoot in the yard, wrists still bruised from iron. He did not bow when I approached, nor look me in the eye. He only said, "Where you need me, missus," in a voice that carried more calm than most white men I'd ever met. Something about him unsettled me, not his size, though he was built like the oaks lining the creek, but the restraint in him, as if he was a man who had learned that the smallest movement could wake violence. That night, as the rain seeped through the roof and dripped into the basin by the stove, I thought of how I had come to fear and rely on him in equal measure. The night riders had grown bolder since Thomas's deathmen with torches, masks, and laughter that sounded like wolves. Twice, they had come near enough that I could hear the creak of saddles, their shouts about widow's land carried by the wind. Each time, Jonah had been the one who stood outside until dawn, unarmed, guarding a mistress who would never be allowed to thank him. My fingers found the rosary beads hanging from the wall hook. I had not prayed in months, not truly, but I whispered one now, not for my soul, but for his. The candle on the hearth flickered weakly, illuminating the chair where Thomas once sat with his ledger. His handwriting still marked the pages, neat and cold, listing human lives as property. I wondered what he'd think now, if he saw his widow begging a black man not to enter her home, not because she feared him, but because she feared what would happen if he did. Outside, thunder rolled again, shaking the windows. I rose and went to the parlor, pulling the curtain just enough to see through. A flash of lightning revealed him, faintly visible at the edge of the yard, soaked to the skin, shoulders glistening under the rain. He hadn't gone far. He was watching, still guarding. My heart twisted. The world would never understand that sight, the widow and the slave, both prisoners of different cages, bound by fear and a tenderness neither dared to name. I wanted to open the door then. I wanted to tell him that I was tired of pretending the walls between us meant anything in a house where ghosts already walked freely. But courage and recklessness are twin sisters, and I had already buried too much of myself in the red soil of this farm. So I stayed where I was, watching him until the rain swallowed his shape into darkness. The wind whistled through the chinks in the boards, carrying the smell of wet clay and the faint sweetness of magnolia from the grove. Somewhere, a whippoorwill called, mournful and steady. When I finally turned away, the lamp was nearly out. I added one more log to the fire and whispered to the empty room, "Lord, keep him safe." The storm raged through the night, rattling shutters and flooding the fields. But I could not sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the door, saw the outline of him beyond it, saw my own hand on the latch, and I wondered not for the first time what might have happened if I had opened it. Because the truth is, that night did not begin our story. It ended it. And to understand why I begged him not to enter, you must know how we both became prisoners on this land. How love, when it blooms in the wrong soil, can be as dangerous as a loaded gun in the dark. The morning after the storm, the air hung thick and gray, smelling of wet earth and smoke from the dying embers in the hearth. The rain had eased, leaving behind shallow pools that reflected the warped shape of the house, my house tilting slightly to one side where the foundation had settled unevenly over the years. The fields beyond were a quilt of mud and broken stalks, the remains of another failed harvest. I stood on the porch with a cup of cold coffee and tried to imagine what Thomas would have said if he could see what his grand dream had become. But Thomas was gone, and dreams meant little when the soil refused to yield. When we married, I had been barely 20, and he nearly twice that. I remember his hands broad, calloused but gentle at first. He was not cruel, only distant, like a man who'd forgotten how to look anyone in the eye. My father had arranged the union, as fathers did, trading daughters for security, one debt swallowed by another. Thomas brought me from Natchez to this stretch of backcountry along the Mississippi edge, where the air never quite cooled and the nights hummed with the restless cries of frogs and unseen things. He said the land would make us rich, that cotton was the one certainty left in this uncertain world, but the soil was clay and stubborn, and every year the ledger ink bled more red than black. By the time the fever took him suddenly, violently, like a match burning down to nothing, our marriage had already withered into silence. We shared a bed, but not warmth, a roof, but not affection. He left me the land, the debts, and the people he had purchased as if they were cattle. Old Moses was the first he came with the property, half blind and limping, his gray hair tied back with a frayed cord. He spoke little but worked endlessly, mending, fixing, shaping the tools with hands that trembled only when he was still. He called me Miss Ellie instead of mistress, a small rebellion I never corrected. Then there was Lila, just 16, barely grown, who spent most of her days at the washtub or tending the chickens. Her songs soft and sorrowful, full of a longing I dared not ask about. And then there was Jonah. He arrived a week after Thomas's burial, brought by a trader from Natchez, who stank of rum and cheap tobacco. The man presented the bill of sale like a holy scripture, his voice slick with false courtesy. "Strong one," he'd said. "You won't find better for the price. Bit of a temper, though. Knows letters. Came off a debt case in Orleans." He'd grinned when I hesitated. "If he gives trouble, whip the knowledge out of him. It's the only language they learn." Jonah was chained at the wrists, but he stood tall, too tall for the room, it seemed. His skin gleamed dark against the dim light, his eyes unreadable. There were old scars crossing his forearms, long-healed welts that had turned pale and shiny. The trader called him the Brute, said he'd once thrown an overseer into a ditch for beating a boy near to death. I should have felt fear, but what I felt instead was something closer to curiosity. When the man left, Jonah stood silently in the yard while I signed the papers. The air between us felt like a stretched cord ready to snap. I remember asking, "Do you understand your duties here?" And he answered quietly, "Yes, ma'am, I understand." His voice was smooth, unexpected, like a river running deep beneath still water. The first few weeks he worked without complaint. He mended fences, repaired the roof, cleared the ditch lines choked with weeds. He spoke little, but I noticed things, the precision in his movements, the way he handled tools like they were extensions of his body. He never lingered near me, never looked too long, but I could feel his awareness, a subtle watchfulness that unsettled and comforted me all at once. The townsfolk, though, were less forgiving. News of Thomas's death had traveled fast, and with it came the scavengers' neighbors offering help, traders demanding payments, and men like Mr. Harlan, who saw opportunity in my loneliness. Harlan was a widower himself, owning 300 acres and 30 slaves just south of here. He had a way of speaking that made every word sound like a promise, wrapped around a threat. "The land's too much for you, Mrs. Wainwright," he said one afternoon when he stopped by to pay respects. He stood on my porch, hat in hand, his eyes lingering too long on the space between my collar and my throat. "You'd do better letting a man take the burden off your hands. You can't run this place alone." "I've managed," I replied, though the lie tasted bitter. He chuckled. "You've got that big one now, the Brute from Natchez. Folks say he's trouble. If he snaps, you'll have more than debts to worry about." His words settled in my stomach like stones. That night I couldn't shake the thought of Jonah's strength, his silent presence in the fields. The image of those calloused hands capable of building or breaking kept rising in my mind. The following morning, I found fresh firewood stacked neatly by the kitchen door. The logs were split clean, uniform, and the scent of pine still clung to the bark. Jonah was nowhere in sight, but his work was unmistakable. It was such a small gesture, but it filled me with a strange warmth and guilt. I had not asked for it, yet he had done it all the same. Days stretched into weeks. The rains came, the fields softened, and I learned the rhythm of managing a farm alone. I signed orders with a shaking hand, bartered eggs for seed, and learned how to drive the mule when no hired help came. At night, I went over the ledgers by candlelight, tracing the ink that showed how quickly the land was bleeding me dry. Harlan's visits became more frequent. He brought gifts: candied pecans, a bottle of sherry, an offer to send one of his overseers to keep watch. I declined every time, but each refusal seemed to amuse him more than deter. "You'll change your mind," he said once, his smile thin. "A woman alone is like a house without a lock. Someone's bound to walk in." His meaning was clear. One afternoon, after he'd left, I found Jonah standing at the edge of the field, watching the road where Harlan's carriage had vanished. "You best stay clear of that man," he said, his voice low but steady. "I don't need your warnings," I snapped, more harshly than I meant. "You forget your place." He looked at me then, not with anger, but with something closer to pity. "Ain't about place, missus. Just don't like seeing dogs sniffing round a door that ain't theirs." The words struck something deep. I wanted to scold him for the insolence, but I couldn't, because beneath them was truth. That night, I dreamed of the door again. In the dream, it was half open, rain blowing in, and Jonah stood on the threshold, his face shadowed, his hand outstretched. I woke before I could see what he wanted. As winter crept closer, the fields turned to brown muck, and the nights grew long. The debts pressed heavier. I began rising before dawn, working beside Jonah in the fields because there was no one else left to help. We said little, but the silence between us grew thick, charged. I could sense his caution, how he kept distance even when handing me tools, how he turned his gaze downward when I brushed past him. Yet once, when I slipped in the mud and fell to my knees, he was there in an instant, strong hands pulling me upright. For a heartbeat, his grip lingered. Our eyes met. The world held still. Then I stepped back, muttered something meaningless, and walked away, heart hammering as if I'd escaped a sin. In the days that followed, I caught him watching me from across the yard, quick glances that disappeared the moment I looked back. I should have dismissed it, should have reasserted the boundaries of mistress and slave. But the truth, the dangerous truth, was that I didn't want to. In a world that had taken everything from me, husband, comfort, security, he was the only living soul who saw me as something more than a transaction or a piece of land. And that, I feared, was the beginning of my ruin. One evening, I stood on the porch as the sun sank red behind the trees, the sky bleeding color into the horizon. Jonah was by the fence line, hammering a new post into the mud. His shirt clung to his back, sweat darkening the fabric, muscles shifting beneath the skin like coiled ropes. I should have gone inside. Instead, I watched until he looked up, his gaze catching mine. For one breath, we simply stared, and in that silent exchange, something passed between us, unspoken, forbidden, but alive. I turned away before I could read its name. That night I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the whippoorwills calling in the distance, and whispered to myself a truth I would never admit aloud. It was not fear that kept me from opening the door to him. It was longing, and longing in this world was more dangerous than hate. By the first thaw of spring, the land had turned to a brown, sucking swamp. The rows that should have been green with new shoots lay drowned beneath puddles of standing water. Every morning I woke to the same sight: broken fence rails, mud, and a gray sky that never quite lifted. The world itself seemed tired of me, as if it wished I would leave it be. The creditors came first. 2 men from Natchez in long coats, polite as preachers but hungry as dogs. They brought ledgers and sealed papers, and that look men wear when they've already decided your fate. I stood in the parlor while they read the numbers aloud. $400 due for seed and mule feed, 200 more for tools ordered and never paid. I listened, nodding, though my stomach was a pit of ice. One of them, a young man with freckles, looked almost sorry. The older one did not. "You've still got assets, ma'am," he said. "Land, the house, the slaves. Plenty of buyers, willing to take the burden off your shoulders." He said it kindly, as though selling my entire life were a charitable act. I dismissed them as soon as decency allowed. After they left, I found Jonah by the barn, mending the wheel of the broken cart. He paused when he saw my face. "They come again?" I nodded. "What they want this time?" "What they always want," I said. "Everything." He tightened the bolt on the wheel, wiped his hands, and looked toward the horizon. "Ain't much left for them to take except the bones of this land." I should have told him not to speak so freely, but I didn't. His words carried no rebellion, only fact, and I was too tired to pretend the truth was blasphemy. That afternoon, Harlan came riding through the gate like he owned the place. His coat was new, his horse shining from good feed. I stood on the porch as he tied the reins, tipping his hat in that mock-courteous way he used when he meant to insult without saying a word. "Mrs. Wainwright," he drawled, "you're looking pale. You've been overworking yourself." "I do what I must," I said. He smiled thinly. "A woman alone shouldn't have to do so much. A partnership, perhaps that's what you need." "I have no need for partners." "Don't you?" He stepped up the porch stairs, his boots leaving wet prints on the wood. "Rumor in town says you're near broke, that your farmhand eats better than you do." His eyes flicked toward the yard where Jonah stood, shirtless, splitting logs. "Big one, isn't he? You ought to be careful. A brute like that, left without proper discipline, well, folks might start talking." "They already are," I said. He grinned, showing his teeth. "Then give them something cleaner to talk about. Let me help you, Elinor." His voice softened on my name, but there was nothing gentle in it. "I could pay your debts, keep you safe." I felt my throat tighten. "At what cost?" He shrugged. "Just a signature and perhaps a ring." I turned away, disgusted, but he caught my arm. His hand was warm and strong, the skin soft from idleness. I pulled free, glaring at him. "You forget yourself." He laughed softly. "You think you can run this place with nothing but that black beast and a pair of children? You'll lose it all. Maybe worse." That night I found a dead crow nailed to the gatepost. No note, just feathers slick with blood. The message needed no words. Jonah saw it before I did. He pulled the carcass down and buried it in the mud behind the smokehouse, saying nothing. But the muscle in his jaw worked like he was grinding his teeth. Later, when the sun had set and the house was quiet, I heard footsteps on the porch again, not his, but Harlan's men, 2 of them, their laughter low and mean. I sat inside, holding the shotgun Thomas had left, every creak of the boards like a drumbeat in my chest. But they didn't knock. They just circled once and left, leaving boot prints in the mud and the smell of whiskey on the wind. When dawn came, found Jonah waiting by the barn, his shirt damp with sweat, eyes sharp. "You shouldn't stay alone in that house," he said. "Ain't safe no more. I'm not leaving my home." He looked at me then, really looked, his gaze steady, not pleading, not proud. "Then let me keep watch. I don't sleep much anyhow." I wanted to say no. A white widow letting a slave stand guard outside her door was the kind of story that could destroy us both. But the thought of another night hearing boots on the porch, laughter in the dark, I couldn't bear it. "Fine," I said softly. "But stay out of sight. If anyone asks, I'll say you're in the fields." He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." For several nights he kept his vigil, silent as shadow. I caught glimpses of him through the parlor curtain, standing near the tree line, motionless. Sometimes in the small hours, I'd light a candle and think of calling him in for warmth, for conversation, for anything to break the loneliness. But the memory of that crow on the gate always stopped me. Then came the morning Lila burst into the kitchen, breathless. "Miss Ellie, Mr. Harlan, he was in town talking with the sheriff. Saying your black man been too close. Saying he seen him by your window." I froze with the coffee pot halfway to the stove. "That's a lie." "Yes, ma'am," she said, eyes wide with fear. "But they fixin' to come out here, check on things." I sat down hard on the nearest chair. It was happening just as Jonah had warned. That evening I called him to the porch. The air was thick with gnats, the sun sinking red behind the cypress grove. He stood at the bottom of the steps, hat in hand, waiting. "They mean to trap you," I said quietly. "They'll come looking for proof, for a reason to say you've overstepped." I know. His calm unnerved me. You don't seem afraid. He looked up then, and his eyes met mine. I've been afraid since the day I was born. Fear don't keep a man alive. Caution does. I can send you away, I said suddenly. To another place. Somewhere they won't find you. He shook his head. You send me off, they'll say I ran. Runaways get hunted. My breath caught. Then what can we do? He glanced toward the darkening yard. We wait. Keep quiet. Don't give them what they want. For a long moment, we stood there, the space between us humming with words. Neither of us dared speak. The cicadas screamed from the trees, and the smell of rain hung heavy on the wind. You ever think about leaving? I asked finally. He hesitated. Every day. But freedom's a road that ends in another man's gate. Something inside me cracked then. Something I hadn't realized was brittle. It shouldn't be that way, I whispered. He looked at me with a strange gentleness. It always been that way, missus. Only difference is who's holding the key. I turned away, pretending to study the horizon, though my eyes burned. Go back to the quarters, I said softly. If they come tonight, I want them to see me alone. He didn't move. And if they don't, then we survive another day. He lingered a moment longer, then nodded and walked into the gathering dark. I watched until his figure vanished among the trees, the ache in my chest a dull, steady pulse. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me flinch, the creak of the rafters, the whisper of the wind through the shutters. Near midnight, lightning flashed, illuminating the yard for an instant, and in that pale light I saw him again, standing by the fence, unarmed, rain pouring over him, watching, protecting. I pressed my hand to the window pane, wanting to tell him to come inside, to share the warmth of the fire, to stop pretending we were two strangers bound by chains and skin. But I didn't, because I knew that what I felt, whatever name it deserved, was a sin that could cost him his life. And yet, when dawn broke, I found myself smiling for the first time in months, because despite everything, the debt, the threats, the loneliness, I was still here. And so was he. But the world does not tolerate such fragile peace. By the end of that week, Harlan sent word through old Moses that he meant to visit again, for business. The way Moses said the word told me it meant something uglier. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the shotgun propped against the wall. The lamp flickered, and the room felt smaller than ever. I could hear Jonah's hammer from the barn, steady and sure, like a heartbeat in the distance. I whispered into the empty air, half prayer, half confession. If the world demands a monster, let it be me, not him. Outside, thunder rolled over the fields, a low warning from the heavens. The war between fear and longing had begun, and I already knew which side would win. Harlan came back on a Thursday, the kind of day that couldn't decide whether it was winter or spring. The sky was low and colorless, the air damp with a chill that clung to the bones. I remember the way the wind moved through the pines, making a sound like distant voices arguing. It suited my mood. I saw his horse first, that proud chestnut beast he never failed to show off, trotting through my gate as if the fence line had never meant anything. Dust rose beneath its hooves, even on wet ground, and the sight of it sent a knot of dread into my stomach. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped out onto the porch before he had the chance to knock. "Afternoon, Mrs. Wainwright," he called, tipping his hat. "Hope I'm not catching you at a bad moment." "Every moment these days is bad," I said. "What do you want?" He laughed, as though I'd made a harmless joke instead of a tired confession. "Business," he replied. "And neighborly concern." Behind him, near the barn, Jonah was unloading sacks of feed from the cart. He straightened briefly, glancing toward us, then went back to lifting as if the weight of the world belonged on his shoulders. Harlan followed my gaze. "That one works hard, doesn't he?" "He works," I said. "Hard is your word. Strong back, anyway." He mused. "Strong arms. Men in town say he's trouble. You heard the tales from Natchez? They call him a brute there. Dangerous stock." "I'm tired of men telling me which of my things are dangerous," I said, "especially when they don't pay for them." His smile faltered. "Just for a heartbeat. Then it came back. Sharper. Still prickly, I see. I like that about you, Elinor. Shows you've got some fight left in you. He tied his horse loosely to the post and climbed the steps without being invited. His boots left small crescents of dry mud on the worn boards. He smelled of leather, cologne, and the faint metallic tang of coin, a man who handled money more than earth. "May I come in?" he asked, though he was already at the threshold. I blocked the doorway. "Say what you came to say." He studied me, my unpinned hair, my faded dress, the weariness I could no longer hide. "Very well," he said softly. "The men from Natchez were in town yesterday, you know. Stopped by my place. Said you're near 600 in arrears, maybe more." My jaw tightened. My debts are my own affair. In theory, yes. His gaze drifted past me to the lean interior of my home. But when a widow fails to meet obligations, the community has a way of taking an interest. "I've met your community," I said. "I'm not impressed." His eyes flashed. "You should be. They're the ones who decide what kind of woman you are, Elinor." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "And what kind of man that slave of yours is." I stiffened. "Leave him out of this." "I can't." He shrugged, as if his hands were tied by some nameless law. "A lone woman. A big buck slave. Night riders say they've seen him near your door, standing in the dark like he owns the yard." My blood went cold. "He watches for prowlers. Yours among them, no doubt." He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You see, this is what I'm talking about. You talk like that in front of witnesses, they'll say you've grown fond. They'll say worse. I don't care what they say. You will." He took a half-step closer. I could feel the heat of his breath, sour with whiskey and arrogance. "Because once they've painted you as a woman who can't keep her place, once they decide your slave is more than a worker to you, they will not stop. Not until one of you hangs and the other is ruined." My hand shot out, pressing flat against his chest before I even realized I'd moved. I shoved him back, more from revulsion than strength. "Get off my porch." His eyes hardened, turning flat as coin. "I'm offering you protection," he said. "No one questions a wife. Especially not a wife whose husband still holds the note on her land." The words hovered between us like a noose. "You hold my debt?" I asked quietly. He smirked. "Bought it up cheap when the others lost patience. All neat and proper. That makes this land half mine already if I decide to press it." My knees nearly buckled. I steadied myself against the doorframe. "You vulture." "Call me what you like," he said. "I'm trying to save you from yourself." His gaze drifted again toward the yard, where Jonah had stopped working, standing still as stone, jaw clenched. "And from that creature you keep around." "He has a name," I snapped. "Not to men who'll sit on a jury," he replied. "To them, he's just a brute with hunger in his eyes, and a lonely white widow in his reach. One whisper, one accusation, and they'll come with rope and torches and call it justice." Swallowed, tasting copper. He softened his voice, the way a man softens when coaxing a skittish horse. "Marry me, Elinor. You keep the house. I settle your debts. That Negro gets sold off clean, and all this talk about impropriety dies on the vine." The image of Jonah being marched away in irons, another bill of sale passed from hand to hand, rose so vividly that my gut twisted. "Absolutely not," I whispered. His mask slipped. For a moment, I saw the fury beneath the indignation of a man unaccustomed to being refused. "You think you have a choice?" he hissed. "I know I do," I said, though every part of me trembled. No is my choice." He stared at me another heartbeat, then straightened, smoothing his coat. "Very well," he said finally, "but don't expect me to keep defending your honor while you throw it away. I never asked you to defend anything." He walked back down the steps, pausing at the bottom to glance toward Jonah, who watched from the barn's shadow, hammer still in his hand. "Mind that animal," Harlan called loudly, voice carrying across the yard. "Wouldn't want him forgetting which side of the door he belongs on." Jonah said nothing. He looked at the man, then at me, then turned and went back into the barn. I stood on the porch until Harlan was nothing but a blur of dust and horseflesh on the road. Only then did I let myself sag against the railing, breath shaking. The rotting wood creaked under my weight, protesting like an old joint. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I moved through my chores as if underwater, stirring the pot on the stove, checking the henhouse, counting the dwindling jars in the pantry while his words dragged behind me like chains. He owns your debt. He can take your land. He can take your life without even dirtying his hands. By sundown, the sky had deepened to a bruised purple. The first stars blinked faintly through the veil of cloud. Lila had long retired to the small lean-to she shared with Moses, both of them exhausted from their own loads of work. The house grew quiet, the kind of quiet that magnifies every creak and sigh. I lit a single candle and sat at the table with Thomas's old ledger open before me. Names, numbers, purchases, and sales stared back at me, all traced in his precise hand. I turned a page and found, near the bottom, a line that still made my skin crawl. Jonah, male, prime field hand, purchased to offset deficit. Reduced to ink, to balance, to commodity. The door creaked. I started, heart leaping to my throat. But it wasn't the front door, it was the back one, leading from the kitchen onto the small porch that faced the well. "Mrs.," came his voice, low and careful. "It's me." I set down the pen, fingers smudged with ink, and turned. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, the lamplight catching on the sheen of sweat still shining on his brow from evening chores. "You shouldn't come in without knocking," I said automatically, though my voice lacked conviction. "I did knock," he replied. Door was open. I realized it was true. In my distraction, I'd left it unlatched. The vulnerability of that mistake sent a fresh shiver through me. "What is it?" I asked. He stepped inside, but only just, as if respecting an invisible line. His eyes flicked to the ledger, then back to my face. "I heard him," he said quietly. Harlan heard what he said. Heat flooded my cheeks, half from anger, half from shame. "Eavesdropping is dangerous," I said. "For you." "Wasn't meaning to," he answered. "Sound carries, Miss Elinor. Wind always been a gossip out here." I exhaled slowly. "Then, you know he holds the note." He nodded once. "He mean to use it. Man like that don't talk less he ready to act." I sank onto the chair, bones suddenly heavy. "He wants to marry me, own the land outright, sell you off as part of the bargain." Jonah's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained calm. I figured, "That doesn't frighten you? Being sold?" His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Been sold before. Feels like dying with your eyes open. But if it happened again, don't reckon I'll get back up." I swallowed hard. "I can't let that happen." "What you gonna do to stop it?" he asked softly. There was no challenge in his tone, only honesty. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know this much. If they come looking for a reason to destroy us, we cannot hand it to them wrapped in ribbon." He watched me for a long moment, the candlelight reflecting in his eyes. "They already made up stories," he said. "About me, about you. Don't matter how clean a body stand if someone else draws the picture." I met his gaze. "Then we make our own picture first." He tilted his head slightly. "How you mean?" I looked toward the windows, where the dark pressed against the glass. "If you stay near this house at night, they will see what they want to see. They will twist it until it fits their hunger. So from now on, you don't step on this porch, unless I call you not for wood, not for nothing." His lips parted, as if to protest. I lifted a hand. "But if they come, if Harlan or his men try to force their way in, then you come anyway. You hear me? I would rather be damned by truth than protected by lies." Silence stretched between us, taut as a rope. "You asking me to guard you," he said finally, "and to stay away from you?" "Yes." The word scraped my throat on the way out. "Both." His eyes softened with something that hurt to look at. "That's a hard road, Mrs." "I know." He stepped back toward the doorframe, one hand resting lightly on it. "Then we walk it," he said, "both of us. careful. The way he said "we" settled over me like a cloak too heavy and too warm, all at once. I stood. Then it settled. A pact. He nodded, eyes never leaving mine. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between us, the rough grain of the floorboards, the faint crackle of the candle, the quiet hum of our breathing. The distance felt like a knife's edge, thin and dangerous. "Whatever comes," he said, voice low, "I won't be the one that brings harm to your door. Not by stepping in where I ain't wanted." The words cut me, because they were not true. He was wanted more than I dared admit, but the wanting itself was what made him unsafe. "I never said you weren't wanted," I murmured, before I could stop myself. His eyes flared with something bright and pained. For a second, the air between us crackled like the moment just before lightning finds a tree. "We both know want don't matter much in this world," he answered. "Not for folks like me, not for women like you." He tipped his head, a gesture more respectful than any bow I'd ever seen from a white man, then stepped back onto the porch. The night swallowed his figure whole, leaving me alone with the candle and the ledger and a heart beating so loud it might as well have been a drum. That was the night our lines were drawn, the night we agreed to stand together while pretending to stand apart. The pact we made in the dark bound us tighter than any law could. It also set the stage for everything that came after. Because once two souls decide to protect each other in a world built on chains and lies, their fates twist together like roots beneath the soil, hidden but impossible to tear apart without destroying the ground itself. The days that followed our pact felt heavy, stretched thin like wire ready to snap. Every sunrise came pale and uncertain, and every night carried the same dread that this uneasy peace could not last. I kept to my routines with the precision of someone trying to convince herself that order still meant safety. I rose before dawn, lit the stove, stirred cornmeal into water until it thickened, and called to Lila to bring in eggs from the hens. By the time the sky bruised pink, I'd already checked the fences and walked the edge of the cotton rows, pretending the soil might still forgive me. But beneath that rhythm, the tension grew like roots in dark earth. Harlan had not returned in person, but his shadow lingered. The men from Natchez stopped by again, this time with polite warnings. They mentioned concerns about the way my farm was being run. The older one smiled too much as he spoke, as though he enjoyed watching a trapped creature guess at what cage waited next. After they left, I found Jonah near the smokehouse sharpening an axe. The metallic scrape carried across the yard. "They came again," I said. He didn't look up. What'd they say this time? "That they'll bring someone from the county to review my management." He set the blade down slowly, wiping it with a rag. "That mean the sheriff?" "Yes," I said. He gave a low whistle through his teeth. "Sheriff rides with Harlan on Sundays." I nodded. We didn't need to say more. The trap was tightening. That evening, I caught Lila crying behind the kitchen. When I pressed her, she confessed what she'd overheard in town Harlan boasting to the grocer that soon the Wainwright widow would be properly handled. His laughter had made her run all the way home. Moses spat when he heard it. "Man like that don't talk less he's sure of his rope," he said. "You mind what he's setting up, Miss Ellie. They want that big man of yours caught where he don't belong." Those words burrowed into me. I began to see danger in everything, the glint of lanterns by the creek at night, the echo of hoofbeats on the road, the way even the neighbors' wives looked away too quickly when I passed through town. One humid afternoon, I took the wagon into Natchez, myself needing to sell what little cotton I'd managed to dry before the rains. Jonah offered to come along, but I refused. I knew what eyes would see a white woman and a black man alone together on a road and what mouths would do with that vision. The trip was miserable. The merchants weighed the bales with exaggerated care, muttered about lower quality, and paid me less than half what they owed. On the ride home, the mule limped, the axle squealed, and I kept glancing at the tree line, certain someone was following. By the time I reached the gate, dusk had fallen. Jonah was there waiting, arms crossed, gaze scanning the road behind me. "Thought you might not come back," he said. I forced a smile. "I always come back." He looked unconvinced. World don't always let folks do what they mean to. We worked in silence to unload the wagon. His nearness steadied me, though I hated admitting it. The simple act of passing the sacks between us, the rhythm of movement and breath, created a fragile peace neither of us dared name. But when my fingers brushed his, something electric sparked a tremor that felt more alive than anything I'd known in months. I snatched my hand away as if burned. He caught the motion but said nothing, only nodded once, as if to remind us both of the pact. Distance keeps us alive. That same week, I began noticing strange things around the farm. Tools missing from the shed. A window shutter torn loose, though there'd been no storm. Footprints, heavy boot prints, leading up to the porch and back again. Jonah found them first. "They was here last night," he said. "Who?" "Men who don't come to help." He crouched near the tracks, fingers tracing the outline in the damp soil. 2, maybe 3. One wears spurs. "That'd be Harlan's man, Jessup." My chest tightened. "Why?" He stood slowly, his height blocking out half the morning sun. "They looking for a story, and they gon' make one if they can't find it." I didn't ask what kind of story. I already knew. In the South, the quickest way to destroy a black man was to claim he'd touched a white woman, and the quickest way to destroy that woman was to say she'd invited it. That night I could not sleep. I sat in the parlor staring at the old clock, listening to the slow, even tick. The air felt wrong, too still. Somewhere outside a whippoorwill called, then stopped mid-cry. The silence that followed pressed against my skin. I rose, took the shotgun from its stand, and went to the window. In the faint moonlight I saw motion near the barn shadows, shifting where no wind moved. Then the faint glint of a lantern. I opened the door quietly, stepping into the damp night air. Jonah emerged from the darkness before I could call his name. "Stay inside," he said. "They're out there." I whispered. "I know. That's why you gotta stay behind the wall." He started toward the barn, silent as a cat. I wanted to follow, but forced myself to obey. From the porch, I watched him disappear between the trees. The moments that passed afterwards stretched like hours. Then came voices harsh, slurred by drink. One shouted, "Where's your lady boy?" Another laughed, and I heard the dull thud of fists, then Jonah's deep voice, calm even now. "Ain't your business." A crack split the night gunfire. My scream caught in my throat. The lantern light swung wildly, then vanished. By the time I reached the yard, the intruders were gone. Jonah was kneeling in the mud, blood running from a gash at his temple. I dropped to my knees beside him. "You're hurt?" "Not bad," he murmured. "Bullet missed. Just grazed me." He touched the wound lightly. "They wanted me to fight back, Miss Elinor. Wanted proof." "Proof of what?" His eyes met mine, dark and steady. "That I'm what they say I am." I helped him to his feet, half dragging, half guiding him to the kitchen. There, under the flickering lamplight, I cleaned the cut with shaking hands. He winced, but didn't pull away. "They'll come again," I said. "Let 'em," he replied. "They won't catch me unready next time." "No," I whispered fiercely. "They won't catch you at all. You stay near the quarters. You keep to the fields. He caught my wrist gently. "You can't build walls high enough, Miss Elinor, not when the ground itself don't belong to you." The truth of it made me weak. I pulled my hand free and turned away so he wouldn't see the tears rising. "Then what do we do?" He hesitated, then said, "We gather proof." "You still got them papers Harlan made your husband sign? The ones about the debts?" "Yes." "Find 'em. Keep 'em safe. If they show how he took your land crooked, maybe someone in town won't look the other way." I laughed bitterly. "Justice? Here?" He shrugged. "Sometimes justice ain't for winning. It's for telling. So folks can't say they didn't know." The candle between us guttered low, shadows swallowing half his face. The scars along his jaw caught the light like pale rivers. I wanted to reach out, to trace them, to ask who had left them there. Instead, I whispered, "Why do you care what happens to me?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Because you ain't treated me like a ghost. and that's the closest thing to freedom I ever had." The words lodged deep in my chest. 2 nights later, the sheriff arrived. He came at dusk, flanked by 2 deputies. The smell of sweat and horses filled the yard before they even knocked. I met them on the porch, spine stiff, heart thudding. "Evening, ma'am," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Got reports of disturbances. Thought we'd check on things." "Disturbances?" "Men claim they seen your field hand wandering near the road after hours. Makes folks uneasy." "Then tell them to look to their own yards," I said coldly. His gaze sharpened. "You ought to mind your tone, Mrs. Wainwright. A woman alone needs allies." Behind him, one of the deputies smirked. "That the one they called Jonah? Heard he got a mean streak." "Leave him be," I said. "He's done nothing." The sheriff's expression softened with false sympathy. "No one's accusing anyone, ma'am." "Not yet. Just advice. Don't let him get too close after dark. Folks might think wrong." I watched them ride away, dust rising behind their horses, and realized the noose was already half tightened. They didn't need proof. They only needed rumor. When Jonah returned from the fields that evening, I told him everything. He listened quietly, then said, "It's begun." "What has?" "The story they've been waiting to tell. Only question now is who ends up dead at the end of it." I stared at him, horror creeping up my throat. "Don't say that." He gave a weary smile. "It's truth, missus. But truth don't mean surrender. We still got time." "Time for what?" "To write our own ending." The night that followed was moonless. I sat by the window long after the others slept, staring out into the black expanse of the yard. Somewhere beyond, I could just make out Jonah's shape standing watch, motionless, like a statue carved from the darkness itself. It struck me then that the world would never forgive us, neither for the lies told about us, nor for the truths we dared to feel. And yet, for the first time in months, I was not afraid of the dark. I was afraid of the morning. Because dawn meant more men, more questions, and maybe the end of everything we'd tried to protect. After the sheriff's visit, the days took on a terrible stillness like the hush before a storm breaks. It wasn't silence exactly. It was watchfulness. The sound of hooves on the road would make me pause mid-motion. The cry of a hawk overhead would make me think of the men who carried rifles and wore smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The whole county seemed to have decided that my farm was worth watching, and behind every glance, every whisper, I could feel Harlan's hand turning the wheel. He didn't need to come anymore. He had set his stories loose, and they did his work for him. In the post office, in the churchyard, in the market stalls, I could feel people's eyes tracking me, counting the seconds I spent alone, the direction I walked, who carried my parcels. Every errand became a performance of innocence, every word a potential noose. Jonah understood before I did. He stopped moving freely around the yard. He rose before dawn and worked at the farthest field, returning only when the light was gone. When I asked him why, he said simply, "Eyes don't see so much when the sun's low." But the distance hurt. I'd grown used to the quiet comfort of seeing him near the house, the low hum of his voice when he spoke to Moses, the way Lila's laughter sounded brighter when he was around. Now the yard felt hollow, stripped of its center. One evening I walked out toward the edge of the field where he was working. The air smelled of rain again, heavy with the metallic tang of wet clay. He was bent over a plow, shirt plastered to his back, muscles shifting under the sheen of sweat. When he saw me, he straightened, wiping his brow with his forearm. "You shouldn't come out here, Miss Elinor," he said. "I came because I'm tired of hiding," I said. "If they're going to invent stories, let them have something to write about." His eyes widened with something between surprise and fear. "Don't talk like that." "Why not?" I stepped closer. "They've already decided what we are. I'm weary of being judged for sins I haven't committed." He shook his head. "You think the difference between talk and truth don't matter, but it do. One keeps you breathing, the other don't." I stopped a few paces away, the damp soil sucking at my boots. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The frogs were singing. and faraway thunder muttered over the hills. The air between us trembled. I wanted to say something human, something that could break the spell of fear that ruled both our lives, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said softly, "You can't spend your life running from the shadows men throw." He looked at me for a long time, then said, "It ain't the shadows that kill you, Miss Elinor. It's the hands behind them." I had no answer. I turned away before he could see the tears gathering in my eyes. That night the rain came hard, the kind that beat the roof like angry fists. Lila's cabin, built from old pine boards, started leaking at the corners, and she ran to the house crying that the roof was lifting. I grabbed a lamp and followed Jonah out into the storm. Lightning flashed white over the fields, turning him into a silhouette of motion climbing the ladder, nailing the planks, the muscles in his arms taut as rope. "Hold the light steady," he shouted through the downpour. I did, the wind tearing my shawl from my shoulders, rain soaking my hair and dress until it clung to my skin. He swung the hammer again and again, the sound swallowed by the thunder. When one of the boards slipped, I instinctively reached out, steadying the ladder with both hands, my face tilted up toward him. For an instant, the lightning froze us there, me looking up, him looking down, the rain falling like silver threads between us. Then I felt it, the shift in the world, subtle but irreversible. It wasn't love, not the kind you read about in cheap novels, but something rawer, older, something born of shared danger and loneliness. I didn't want to name it, because names gave things power. When the roof was secure, he climbed down, breath ragged, water streaming from his hair. He reached out as if to steady me, but stopped, himself just short of touching. "You're soaked," he said quietly. "So are you." A flash of movement caught my eye, then two men on horseback, half hidden by the trees beyond the fence. Torches guttering in the rain, faces indistinct. Watching. Jonah saw them too. His expression hardened. "Inside," he said. I obeyed without argument. By the time I turned back at the door, the riders were gone. But by morning, everyone in town had heard about the sight. 2 witnesses, they said, had seen me out in the rain, standing too close to my field hand, the light between us like a wedding candle. I heard it from the milk boy who came to deliver butter. He said it shyly, like gossip too juicy to hold back. That was the day the whispers stopped being whispers. They became stories told as fact. The widow and her brute, the mistress and her savage protector. I heard my name in every sneer, saw my shame in every sidelong glance, and yet, in the strangest way, the more they lied, the more I felt the truth binding me to him. Because the lies only existed to punish the truth that somewhere inside I did care for him, not with the softness of courtship, but with the desperate tenderness of one soul recognizing another in the dark. The next week I noticed patrol riders circling the property at dusk. They said they were keeping peace, but I knew what they were keeping. Watch. Jonah began sleeping less, patrolling the edge of the yard at night with an old iron bar instead of a rifle. I begged him to rest. "They'll take one look at you and see a target," I said. "They already do," he answered. "Rest won't change that." Moses warned me too. He came to the porch one evening, cane tapping on the boards. "Miss Ellie," he said, "world got 2 kinds of chains, iron ones, and the kind you put round your heart. You careful which kind you wear." I wanted to tell him it was already too late. Even Lila, sweet and frightened Lila, grew tense around me. She avoided my eyes, her silence full of knowing. Once, when I handed her a folded cloth for mending, she whispered, "They don't forgive that look, Miss Ellie. Not from you to him." Then she fled before I could answer. That night I stayed up by the fire, unable to shake her words. I told myself that what I felt wasn't wrong, only impossible. But in this world, impossible things were punished like crimes. Toward midnight, I heard footsteps again, slow, heavy, coming toward the porch. I rose, every nerve alive. But when the knock came, it wasn't timid, it was careful. "It's me," Jonah said. I opened the door a crack, heart hammering. He stood in the lamplight, face drawn, eyes dark with worry. "They spreading more talk," he said. "Heard him in town. Harlan say he's got proof now. Said he's seen enough to make the sheriff come back. I swallowed hard. Proof of what? He looked at me a long time before answering. Of what they think we are. The air went cold. I felt the world tilt. He's lying. He nodded. Don't matter. He'll make the lie truth. He got money. Got friends. What do we do? He hesitated, then said, we wait, and when it come, we stand. You tell the truth, no matter what they ask. The words felt brave, but I heard the fear under them, the quiet understanding that sometimes truth wasn't enough. He turned to leave, but before he stepped off the porch, I said softly, Jonah. He stopped. Do you ever wish? I began, then faltered. Do you ever wish we'd met in another life? Another place? He didn't turn around. All the time, he said, but this the only life I got, and it's already more dangerous than it should be. When he was gone, I leaned against the door, listening to the rain start again, steady and relentless. I thought of all the eyes watching us, waiting for one mistake, and I realized we were living in a story already, written by men who wanted blood at the end. But even knowing that, I couldn't stop my heart from beating faster each time I heard his footsteps in the yard. Desire had become its own act of defiance, a quiet, trembling rebellion against the cruelty of the world. By late summer, the cotton bolls were opening white against the brown stems. The fields shimmered under the sun like a sea of ghosts. From a distance, the farm looked almost peaceful again. But I knew peace was only the pause between storms. One afternoon, as I stood hanging linens on the line, I saw a dust rising on the road. 3 riders. I knew before I could see their faces that Harlan was among them. His hat gleamed new, his smile wide as he reined his horse at my gate. Good day, Mrs. Wainwright, he called. Lovely weather. I said nothing. He tipped his hat lower, eyes sliding past me toward the barn where Jonah worked. Fine day for reckoning, wouldn't you say? Then he rode on, without another pandan, word, leaving behind the stink of tobacco and threat. The trap was closing. I could feel it, and somewhere deep inside I knew it would not end without blood. It was the last night of August, when everything finally broke. The air itself felt wrong, too still, too heavy, as if the world were holding its breath. Even the crickets had fallen silent. From the porch, I could see the faint glow of the moon struggling through low clouds, smearing the fields in pale gray light. It should have been peaceful, but there was something in the wind, something waiting. All that day, I'd been haunted by the feeling of being watched. The dogs had barked toward the woods for hours, their throats raw. Lila said she saw horse tracks down by the creek, though we hadn't had visitors in weeks. And twice, while fetching water, I caught the flash of metal, perhaps a buckle or a rifle barrel just beyond the tree line. I told myself I was imagining things. Fear had a way of inventing ghosts when the living ones weren't enough. Jonah had finished his work early that evening. He was in the far field, cutting down the last of the storm-damaged stalks. From where I stood on the porch, I could see his silhouette rising and falling with the motion of his scythe, each swing measured, rhythmic, like a heartbeat keeping the world alive. As the sun slipped away, I called out, Jonah, that's enough for today. He paused, straightened, and wiped his brow. Just one more row, he called back. You'll wear yourself to death, I said. But he only smiled, a brief flicker of warmth across the distance. That smile would be the last moment of peace I ever saw on his face. I had gone inside to light the lamps when it began, a sound first distant, indistinct, like thunder rolling over dry land. Then the creak of saddles, the rhythmic pounding of hooves. My stomach dropped. Moses burst through the kitchen door, face pale beneath his gray stubble. Riders, he gasped. 5, maybe 6, coming fast. My heart seized. Where's Jonah? Still out yonder. I didn't think. I grabbed the shotgun from behind the stove and ran out into the yard. The night swallowed me whole, humid, thick, almost too dark to see. From the road, a lantern's light bobbed like an angry star, and voices followed, shouting over one another. There, by the fence. Get the black bastard! Jonah's figure appeared out of the shadows, running toward the barn. I could see the confusion in his movements. He hadn't yet realized what was happening. Then a gun fired, the sound so sharp it split the world in two. Sparks exploded from the barn door as a bullet struck the latch. "Jonah!" I screamed. He turned toward me, eyes wide. "Get inside!" "No!" I shouted, but he was already moving, ducking low, sprinting for the cover of the trees. Another shot rang out. He stumbled, caught himself, and kept going. The riders thundered through the gate, their horses churning up the dry soil. At their head rode Harlan Thorne, his coat flapping open, a pistol raised high. "Where is he, Elinor?" he bellowed, reining in beside me. "Where's your lover?" I lifted the shotgun and pointed it straight at his chest. "He's done nothing," I said. My voice didn't shake, though my hands did. Harlan smirked. "The sheriff's got a warrant. Says your field hand assaulted you. You gonna tell me it's not true?" The words hit like a slap. "You liar," I hissed. He leaned closer in the saddle, eyes gleaming. "You think anyone's gonna believe a widow over 6 good men? We've seen the way you look at him. The way he looks at you. Everyone's been whispering it for months. You brought this on yourself." Behind him, one of the riders, a deputy, drunk on righteousness and whiskey, called, "Let's drag him out." No need for talk. I stepped forward, the barrel of my shotgun glinting in the dim light. The first man who crosses that line dies on my land. For a second, none of them moved. The horses snorted, uneasy. Even Harlan's smile wavered. Then Jonah's voice came from the darkness. "Stop!" He stepped out from the shadows, hands raised. The moonlight revealed blood streaking down his arm where the bullet had grazed him earlier. "Jonah, don't!" I cried. "It's all right, Miss Elinor," he said softly. "Ain't no sense in you dying for me." He walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, his eyes locked on Harlan's. "You say there's a warrant," he said. "Then show it. Otherwise, you just a mob." Harlan sneered. "A mob's quicker than the law." Before I could move, 2 men dismounted and grabbed Jonah by the arms. He didn't struggle, though his jaw tightened with pain. Harlan swung off his horse and stepped closer, pistol aimed at Jonah's chest. "I should have sold you the day I first saw you look her way," he spat. "You think you're special, don't you? You think because you can read a few words and talk pretty, you're different from the rest." Jonah stared at him calmly. "I know I'm different from you." Harlan's face twisted. He hit Jonah hard across the mouth with the gun barrel. I screamed, lunging forward, but one of the men caught my arm and yanked me back. "Hold her!" Harlan barked. Blood trickled from Jonah's lip. He spat into the dirt, a dark streak that glistened in the torchlight. "You ain't man enough to face the truth," he said. Harlan's finger tightened on the trigger. "Truth is what we make it," he said. "And tonight the truth is—" I didn't let him finish. The shotgun fired, the recoil jolting through my shoulder. The blast tore through the night, and Harlan stumbled backward, clutching his arm with a howl of pain. The gun flew from his hand. Chaos exploded. Horses reared. Men shouted. Someone grabbed me, but Jonah moved. Faster, swinging his elbow, breaking free, striking one rider square in the chest. I heard the crack of bone. Another man lunged with a knife, but Jonah ducked, twisted, and drove his fist into the man's gut. "Run!" I shouted. He hesitated only long enough to meet my eyes, then turned and bolted toward the woods. The riders gave chase, cursing, firing wildly into the trees. The torches flickered like hellfire against the trunks. I fell to my knees, the shotgun smoking in my hands. Harlan lay in the dirt, groaning, his sleeve soaked red. "You'll hang for this," he gasped. "I already have," I whispered. Moses and Lila came running from the cabins, faces pale, eyes wide. "Go," I told them. "Hide in the swamp. Take what you can carry." "Miss Ellie!" "Go!" I screamed. "They'll burn this place before dawn." They fled into the darkness. I stumbled into the house, every sound distant, muffled. My heart beat so loud it drowned the world. I barred the door and collapsed against it, the wood trembling under my weight. Outside, the shouts faded, replaced by the steady hiss of rain beginning to fall. I don't remember how long I sat there. When I finally looked out the window, the torches were gone. The fields were quiet. Only the faint echo of gunfire lingered in the hills. Jonah was gone too. By morning, smoke rose from the woods. The riders had set fire to something, maybe a tree, maybe a man. I didn't know. I couldn't let myself imagine it. Harlan was gone, dragged away by his men to tend his wound. But I knew he wouldn't stop. A man humiliated in front of others was more dangerous than a wounded animal. Before noon, the sheriff returned with 2 deputies. They questioned me on the porch, while Lila sobbed behind the door. "You claim he forced his way into your house?" the sheriff asked, voice oily. I stared at him. "No," I said flatly. "He never touched me. He's innocent." The sheriff frowned. "Then why'd you shoot Mr. Thorne?" "Because he trespassed," I said. "And because I warned him." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "This is bad business, ma'am. You best tell the truth before it gets worse." "I am telling it," I said. But truth had no weight left in this world. When they left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my hands. The skin beneath my nails was still black from gunpowder. I tried to pray, but no words came, only silence. That night, I dreamed of Jonah standing at the edge of the swamp, rain running down his face. He said nothing. He only looked at me, his eyes full of something vast and unspoken. When I woke, the sound of the night was back: the crickets, the frogs, the wind through the pines. Life had continued, indifferent to the ruin it left behind, and I knew then that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the raid, the sky burned pale and cruel. There was no softness in the light, no mercy in the wind. Smoke still drifted from the eastern woods where the mob had passed, and the scent of scorched pine mixed with the faint copper of blood that clung to the damp air. Every breath tasted like iron and ash. I walked through the yard barefoot, the earth cold beneath my feet. The barn door hung half-torn from its hinges, one wall blackened where a torch had licked it before dying in the rain. Chickens scratched nervously in the mud, too afraid to settle. The world felt emptied, as if the violence had taken not just the night, but the air itself. Moses was gone. Lila too. I'd sent them into the swamp with nothing but a few blankets and my prayers. I didn't know if they'd make it to safety. The river swallowed secrets well, but not always kindly. Only I remained. And the silence. Inside the house, the clock still ticked, indifferent to ruin. I lit a lamp though the sun was high, the light weak and wavering like me. My hands trembled as I poured water into a basin and tried to wash away the soot smeared across my arms. But there are stains that water cannot touch. By noon, word had already spread. The preacher's boy came galloping up the road, shouting that the sheriff had formed a search party. "They say he killed one of the men," he said, his young face eager with fear and excitement. "They're dragging the swamp for him right now." I closed the door in his face. The thought of Jonah hunted like an animal made my chest ache so sharply I could hardly breathe. I paced the kitchen, the boards creaking beneath my feet, trying to think. Every plan ended the same way with his death. In this world, an innocent black man was guilt enough. No judge, no jury, only rope and flame. But I couldn't do nothing. I owed him more than silence. That afternoon I went to the barn and saddled Thomas's old mule, its ribs showing under dull hide. I packed what I could. A loaf of bread, a small flask of whiskey, a blanket. Then I took the pistol from the drawer, where Thomas had kept it, and tucked it into the folds of my skirt. The weight felt foreign, yet right. When I reached the edge of the swamp, the sky had turned the color of bruised peaches, purple and gold fading into gray. Cicadas shrilled in the trees, their chorus rising like a fever. The path was half swallowed by mud, but I followed it anyway, leading the mule by the reins. "Jonah," I called softly. My voice vanished into the dense green. "It's me." At first there was nothing. Then a rustle, the faint splash of water. He emerged from the cypress shadows, clothes soaked, face streaked with mud and dried blood. His eyes, though those eyes were still alive, fierce with exhaustion and something close to disbelief. "You shouldn't be here," he said. And you shouldn't be alive, I whispered. But thank God you are. He stared at me, his jaw working as though he were fighting words that couldn't be said. They killed one of their own last night, he said finally. Man named Jessup. Bullet meant for me found him instead. They'll say I did it. Then you have to go, I said. Now, before they find you. Go where? Every road leads to a rope. North, I said. There's a riverboat leaves Natchez in 2 days. Hattie once told me there's men on it who help runaways reach street. Louis. He gave a low laugh, tired, bitter. You talk like you believe in freedom. I do, I said. At least for one of us. He shook his head. They'll come for you if I run. They'll come for me either way, I said. But if you die here, all we've survived will mean nothing. For a long moment we stood there in the half-light, the swamp breathing around us. The frogs croaked, the water lapped, and somewhere far off, a whippoorwill cried its mournful song. The sound felt like a prayer and a warning. Finally, he said, You'll need to lie. I already have, I said, and I'll keep lying if it keeps you breathing. He reached out then, hesitating before his hand found mine. His palm was rough, warm even through the damp. If I go, he said softly, they'll burn you out. Then let them try. His hand tightened around mine, and something inside me broke open, something I'd kept locked away since the night my husband died, since before the ledger, the debts, the hunger. For the first time, I felt not pity or fear, but a wild, burning clarity. We were 2 people standing on the edge of the world, and all the laws of men had already condemned us. What else was there to lose? I lifted my free hand to his face, tracing the line of the scar that cut from his temple to his jaw, his eyes closed, breath shuddering. For a heartbeat, the world vanished. The swamp, the hunt, the centuries of cruelty pressing on our shoulders. There was only warmth, skin against skin, the fragile miracle of still being alive. Then, heard it. Dogs barking in the distance. Men shouting. The spell broke. Go, I said. Now. He pulled away, stepping backward into the water. You ain't got to stay, Miss Elinor. I do. He hesitated once more, then turned and disappeared into the cypress, his figure swallowed by mist. I listened to the splashing fade, then mounted the mule and rode home through the growing dark. They came at dawn. The sheriff, Harlan, and 3 others. I was waiting on the porch, pistol hidden beneath my skirt, coffee steaming on the table beside me. Morning, gentlemen, I said. Harlan's arm was bound in a sling. His face pale, but his grin vicious. We're looking for your boy, he said. Word is he's hiding in the swamp. I wouldn't know, I said evenly. He left days ago. The sheriff frowned. You're protecting him. I'm telling the truth. Harlan stepped closer, his shadow falling across my feet. You know, Elinor, he drawled, there's a price for aiding a murderer. And there's a price for trespass, I said, raising the pistol. Care to see which one's due first? For a moment, none of them moved. Then Harlan laughed a short, harsh bark. You think you can scare me, widow? No, I said, but I can stop you. Before anyone could speak, a cry came from the yard, one of the men shouting, Fire! The barn! We turned. Flames were already licking up the dry timber, orange tongues reaching for the sky. Smoke billowed thick and black. The men rushed toward it, yelling orders. Harlan grabbed my wrist as I turned to run. You did this, he hissed. You'll burn for him. I wrenched free. Maybe I will, I said. But you'll burn first. I swung the pistol up and fired. The shot struck the ground at his feet, close enough to make him stumble. Then I ran into the house, choking on smoke that seeped through the walls. The heat grew fast, unbearable. The fire devoured everything, years of ledgers, furniture, memories. It roared like a living thing, cleansing and cruel. I stumbled out the back door just as the roof collapsed. The blast of heat threw me to the ground. Behind me, the big house that had been my cage for 10 years crumbled into a red inferno. Through the smoke, I saw Harlan retreating on horseback, shouting orders to save his men. The sheriff followed, but none dared return. They would write their own story later about the mad widow who burned her home to ashes for a slave. Let them. Lies were all they ever had. When the flames finally died, I stood barefoot in the ruin, ash clinging to my skin like frost. The world was silent again. The only thing left standing was the iron frame of the bed where Thomas had died. Everything else, my past, my prison, was gone. Somewhere far to the north, I hoped, a riverboat cut through the water, carrying a man with dark eyes and a scar along his jaw. Maybe he would think of me when the wind shifted. Maybe not. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he was free, and that I had finally done one thing that no man could undo. I looked toward the rising sun. The light touched the smoke and turned it gold. It looked almost like forgiveness. When dawn finally came, it found me standing alone among the ruins. The air was still heavy with the smell of burnt pine and charred cotton, that thick clinging odor that seeps into hair, into skin, into the very soul. The big house, once the grand pride of Magnolia Hill, was nothing but ribs of blackened wood and a crumbling chimney that jutted like a grave marker against the gray horizon. The storm of fire had devoured everything: my furniture, my ledgers, my husband's portraits, the china set imported from New Orleans. The wallpaper, once pale blue with flowers, now hung in curled, brittle tongues of soot. The stairs had collapsed into the parlor, leaving only a pile of black dust and twisted nails. It should have felt like loss. Instead, it felt like release. The plantation was dead. The lie of it, the cruelty of it, the polished civility that had hidden the lash, all of it reduced to ash. What stood before me now was truth, raw and ugly, but honest. I walked slowly through the wreckage, my feet crunching over glass and bone-colored plaster. The morning light fell through gaps in the roof, turning the drifting ash into flecks of gold. It looked, for a fleeting moment, like snow. I thought of Jonah then, not as he had looked the night of the raid, blood on his face and fury in his eyes, but as I'd first seen him in the library months ago, the candlelight glinting off his dark skin, the book open in his hands. He had looked like a man holding the weight of the world between his fingers, and for a moment I had mistaken that weight for calm. I hadn't known that calm was what people learned when they'd already been broken and rebuilt too many times. Somewhere out there, I told myself, he was breathing still. I had to believe it. The river carried life as much as it carried death. I stayed by the ruins until midday. Then I turned my back on them and walked to the far field where the cotton once grew high. The stalks were gone, cut to stubble, the soil damp from the night's dew. Each step sank into the earth with a soft sigh, as if the ground remembered everything we had done upon it, the whippings, the songs, the silent tears. I knelt there, scooped a handful of the soil, and let it fall slowly through my fingers. It stained my skin dark. For the first time, I didn't flinch. Moses and Lila found me that afternoon. They came out of the swamp filthy, eyes wide with disbelief at what they saw. Moses leaned on his cane, shaking his head. "Lord Almighty," he whispered, "ain't nothing left but bones." "I know," I said. "You did this?" I nodded once. It was time. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, he smiled, a sad, knowing curve of his lips. Maybe it was. Lila, trembling, stepped closer. "They say the men gone to Natchez," she murmured. "Say Mr. Thorne half dead from the shot. Sheriffs swear he'll send soldiers to hang whoever helped the field hand run." "Then they'll have to find us first," I said. Moses's eyes narrowed. "What you plan to do, Miss Ellie?" "Not miss," I said quietly. "Not anymore." I looked toward the north, where the sky opened wide above the trees. "I'm going to leave this place." He nodded, as though he had known it all along. "Ain't nothing here for the living no more." That night, we camped beside the river. The moonlight rippled across the slow-moving water, painting it silver and black. The swamp insects sang their endless hymn, and the fire we built burned small and cautious, afraid to draw attention. I couldn't sleep. I sat by the fire with the pistol in my lap and watched the smoke curl into the darkness. Lila slept curled against Moses's side, his arm wrapped protectively around her. I envied their peace. In the distance, I heard the low, mournful call of an owl, and then another sound, soft, rhythmic, almost human. My hand went to the pistol, but then I froze. It was humming. A tune, faint but familiar. Steal away to Jesus. The hairs on my arms rose. I stood, listening. The song drifted closer, carried by the wind until I could almost make out the words. Then I saw him. Jonah stepped from the darkness, limping slightly, his clothes torn but his eyes bright. The firelight touched his face, revealing exhaustion and something deeper astonishment that I was still there. For a moment we simply looked at each other, the night around us holding its breath. Then Lila woke with a gasp and ran to him, crying, "He's alive! Praise be, he's alive!" Moses rose, shaking his head. "Boy, you got angels watching over you." Jonah smiled faintly. "Just luck and a muddy river." When his gaze found mine, it held steady. He sat beside the fire, the flames painting gold along his cheekbones. "I heard about the house," he said quietly. "It's gone," I said. "Good," he murmured. "That place was cursed ground." We said nothing more for a long time. The fire crackled softly. He unwrapped a cloth bundle from his coat, a handful of coins, a small Bible, a torn letter. "Old preacher up in Natchez gave me these," he said. "Said there's a man in Street Lewis takes folks further north. Maybe to freedom." I nodded. "You should go." He looked at me across the fire. "Come with me." The words hung between us, impossible and yet so simple. "I can't," I whispered. "Why not?" "Because my face is the wrong color to disappear. Because my name is already written in their ledgers as guilty. Because they'll follow me and find you." He stared into the fire, jaw clenched. "You always been braver than me." "That's not true." He looked up then, eyes glinting like river water. "Ain't it? You burned your whole life to give me a chance at mine." I reached across the space between us and laid my hand over his. "Then live it," I said. "Live it so it means something." He turned his hand, lacing his fingers with mine. The warmth of his skin sank into me like sunlight after too long in the cold. We sat that way until the fire burned low, neither speaking. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, he stood. "It's time," he said. I rose too. My throat ached with all the words I would never say. He slung his small bundle over his shoulder and walked to the water's edge. The mist curled around him, turning his figure ghost-like. He paused and looked back once, the wind stirring the ragged ends of his shirt. "I'll carry your name north," he said softly, "so it don't die here." Then he stepped into the boat and pushed off, the current taking him swiftly into the widening river. I watched until he became a shadow, then a dot, then nothing but the echo of the oars dipping into water. When he was gone, I sat by the river until the sun rose high, drying the dew on my skirts. I thought of all that had been lost, the people, the land, the years. But for the first time I didn't feel chained to it. The past had burned with the house. What remained was only memory, and memory, unlike property, could not be owned. In the years that followed, the war came. The world changed in ways I had never dared to dream. Men in blue uniforms marched through Mississippi, and the whip fell silent for a while. Freedom came written on paper, but the soil remembered too much pain to let it grow easily. I moved north after the war, settling in a small town near Street Lewis. I opened a school for the children of freedmen, teaching letters by candlelight. Some nights, when the wind blew off the river, I thought I heard humming. Outside the window, a low tune, soft and sure, like a promise kept. I never looked. I didn't need to. I lived long enough to see new laws and new lies take the place of the old ones. But sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I could still feel the heat of that night, the fire rising, the world breaking, the first taste of something that felt like freedom. I wrote this all down in a single book, bound in worn leather. I left it with the school when my hands grew too weak to hold a pen. If anyone ever reads these words, I hope they'll understand that love, like truth, is a dangerous thing. But danger, sometimes, is the only thing that makes us alive. And if they ever walk by the river at dusk and see the mist curl above the water, maybe they'll think of him, a man named Jonah, who once read poetry by candlelight, who once risked everything for a glimpse of dignity. And maybe they'll think of me, the widow who burned her cage to set another free. Because in the end, that's all we ever were. Two souls beneath the same impossible sky, bound by the memory of Magnolia soil.